So welcome everybody to this Facebook Live mecfs and the four-letter word that you may need to embrace. Someone in my Facebook group asked the question, I'd like to know if you have any advice for calming a busy mind outside of meditation. My body is really calm now and I feel real energy building, which I'm delighted about. However, my brain is desperate for input. Learning, reading, researching, and generally being constantly curious and nosy. This person says, this has served me well pre-illness in succeeding academically and career-wise, but how do I learn to switch off this insatiable desire for intellectual stimulation? So my response to that, first point is that stimulation is a human need. So allow yourself to have some. And it's also really important to know when you need a break. It's all about balance. We need to find ways of meeting our needs in a way that is sustainable. Some people seek endless stimulation, but find it difficult to achieve quality rest. Being able to rest properly is a skill that is vital for people with mecfs to learn. This is something I cover in the video mecfs and rest. What rest is, what rest isn't. So check that out. The link is below this video. So when I had mecfs, there were times when I was over careful and strict with myself and denied myself some of what I needed. That could be intellectual stimulation, it could be human connection, it could be fun. And if I didn't get some of what I needed, if I wasn't allowing myself some of that stimulation, then what would happen is I would lose that self-discipline. I'd get fed up with being careful and I would just binge on whatever it is I wanted, whether it was playing the guitar or watching movies. I'd kind of go off the rails, which would result in me feeling exhausted, and then I'd have to go back to the other extreme again of having a very limited life. I'd say, when I picked up the guitar, I enjoyed it so much that I didn't want to stop. And it's a bit like not allowing yourself to have a bit of chocolate cake and then binging on and eating the whole cake in one go. So I'd like to consider, do you recognise that pattern? When do you do this? I discovered that it was better to find ways of having a bit of what I fancied regularly rather than binging and busting. So the second point, if you have the energy to something that that feeds your brain's desire for input, that is intellectually stimulating, gives you pleasure, and it sounds like you do have the energy, then do you want to suppress that or to allow yourself to have a bit of what you want? And the third point, being engaged in something you enjoy is a great way of calming the mind. When we are doing things that we enjoy, we can get absorbed in it and lost in it. And this can give us physiological benefits as long as we're listening to our body. That's not an invitation to be hyper-vigilant, by the way. Am I okay? Do I need to rest? It is an invitation just to be centered, to just tune in. There is a difference. I want to illustrate the points I've just made by sharing the story of Stephen Kotler. He's a science writer. I found his story very thought-provoking. He's given a TED talk, I think. And I'm sharing this to give you some food for thought, but not advice that you should do exactly what he did. You have to decide how to use the information from this story. But when he was in his 30s, he had Lyme disease and he was pretty debilitated. He spent 3 years lying in bed, functioning at a very low level. He was in a dark place. He actually was contemplating ending his life. And one day, a friend showed up on his doorstep and demanded that they go surfing. And he said, I thought that was a ridiculous idea, especially as I'd nearly drowned in the water. But this friend kept going on and on about it. And in the end, he gave up and said, yeah, sure, okay, let's go. And he had to be helped to the car and helped into the water. And he was on a beach where the waves were really wimpy, as he describes it. But he says when a small wave came, he automatically turned the board round, jumped up on the board, and as he started getting pushed along by the wave, he felt that he'd popped into a different dimension. Time seemed to slow down. He felt better than he had done in years. And he caught 4 more waves before the fatigue set in, and he had to go home, and he spent the next 2 weeks in bed. People had to bring him food as he was so exhausted. But guess what he did on the 15th day? He went back to the beach again, and he caught some more waves, and he said the same thing happened. He found that he was just getting into that state and into this different state of consciousness, and he caught another bunch of waves and went home. And over the next 6 months, he says the only thing I was doing differently was that I was going surfing, and my functioning level went from 10% to 80% functionality. And he says, as a science journalist, I was curious to look into what was happening and discovered that these strange states that I'd been experiencing whilst out on the waves had a name, and they were called flow states. Scientists define flow as an optimal state of consciousness. This is a state of consciousness where we feel our best, we perform our best. And I think most people have had some experience of this total absorption where we get so focused on something that we're doing that everything else disappears. Time can slow down or even fly. I remember someone talking about being on a transatlantic flight, and they bumped into someone they knew. They ended up sitting next to each other, and they spent 7-8 hours just chatting, and they said the flight seemed that it had passed in a short amount of time when they landed. They didn't go to the loo, they didn't really eat. They were so engaged in what they were doing, time did seem to fly. Stephen Kotler cites a 10-year study where they found that top executives in flow were 5 times more productive when they were out of flow. Athletes excelled when they were in this state. A neurobiological research into flow found that he said that scientists started to understand what was going on in the brain during these states. One of the things that's happening is the prefrontal cortex is switching off. This is where we calibrate time, where conscious thought happens, including self-critical thinking, i.e. criticising and judging ourselves. In one study in Australia, they took 40 people and gave them a really tricky puzzle to solve, and no one was able to solve it. They then used transcranial magnetic stimulation, a magnetic pulse that is directed to the prefrontal cortex, and it knocks it out, and 23 people solved the problem in record time. In this state of flow, the brain produces feel-good neural chemicals. And some research shows that these chemicals enhance learning. In studies on the US military, they found that when snipers were in that state of flow, they learned somewhere between 230 to 500% faster. But what about people with health conditions? He says that being in flow also enhances immune function and helps reset the nervous system. And he believes that it is this that gave his body the chance to heal. Inevitably, there are critiques of this notion. One is that the McKinsey study, the quality of the study is questioned. It's based around anecdotal information. There's lack of information about the methodology. There's a question of cause or effect. Did the activity shut down the inner critic, or did the quietening of the inner critic result in that state of flow? The Hungarian-American psychologist who coined the term of flow says that these enjoyable activities that produce flow have a potentially negative effect. They are capable of improving the quality of existence by creating order in the mind, that they can become addictive. However, these questions pose other interesting questions. What would happen if we learned to quieten or tame the power of the inner critic? What benefits would be derived from being able to do that? What if we were able to find balance between intellectual stimulation and quality rest, if that's what we needed? And if you did overdo it and responded to that in a resourceful way, what would the positive benefits of that be? I can categorically state that learning to understand the inner critic and taking the power it had over me, learning how to switch off the fight or flight mechanism and switch on the parasympathetic nervous system response consistently, and to be relaxed when I did overdo it, had significant positive impacts on my physical and mental health. How did I do that? I did that using brain training techniques. I had learned meditation, but there were times when actually I needed more than that. So a couple of questions for you. When have you experienced this state of flow? Getting lost in something and feeling the benefits. Let's just see if I can see any comments, or I'm still not showing up. Anyway, so yeah, do let me know if you can see me, hear me. But yeah, first question. When have you experienced this state of flow? Getting lost in something, feeling the benefits. It is possible to get into this state in simple ways. Being in conversation, doing something you enjoy, doing something creative. I recall when I had mecfs and I was having cognitive behavioural therapy, the psychologist asked me, what is something you'd love to do? And I said, I'd love to go clubbing. And she said, well, why can't you? And I said, well, it just doesn't seem realistic. And she said, well, what if you actually spent the day before and the day you're going to go just taking it really easy, go out for a bit and, then rest afterwards. And I actually thought, well, okay, I could do that. And whilst I was there at the club, it was amazing. I even though I was tired over the coming days, probably for a week or so afterwards, I had a smile on my face because I had such a great time. I had such fun. And maybe on reflection, I realised I should have found some kind of similar experience that didn't mean going out at 11 o'clock at night, because I'm really not a night owl. And maybe finding something that did suit. A friend of mine told me that she does go to a kind of disco for people who don't like to go to bed late, and that sounds like a lot of fun. And I could have done something like that regularly. I also remember going to a Kundalini yoga class, and the teacher, when I said to her I had ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, and she said, look, just take it easy, do as much as you can. But I overdid it because I was worrying about what others would be thinking if I kept pausing when they would keep going at it. I was thinking they would think, and there was a lot of women there, they'd probably think I was a wimp. And so I pushed myself and I got completely exhausted and I didn't go back. And I kind of feel that if I had kept to my limits then and just kept going back, I suspect I might have benefited from doing that. I also remember going on a weekend course, which was Friday evening to Sunday, and it really felt like stepping out of my comfort zone, but someone had recommended going on this course. And again, being there, being amongst people, feeling kind of normal, it was amazing. I got into a really deeply relaxed state and really enjoyed being there, even though there was some challenging, interesting stuff going on. And I went to bed on a high. It was easy for me to get up in the morning, go back on the Saturday. On the Sunday morning when I woke up, I did feel absolutely exhausted. And as I was walking slowly up to the station, I was saying to myself, am I completely mad? And I had to work really hard at calming my mind and body because I didn't have the tools I have now. if I did, would have meant I would have approached the anxiety that I was generating in a very different way. But when I got there, again, something took over. Again, I just felt a sense of peace. My mind and body were completely still and quiet. And I actually didn't pay for it afterwards in the way that I was expecting to. I did rest afterwards, but I actually got a lot of benefit from doing this thing, which was stepping outside my comfort zone. Fourth point I'd make in response to this question that's been posed is, if you're not doing this already, could you channel some of that desire for learning into learning how to calm a busy mind? So I'll leave you with the following. What are the applications of what I've shared, particularly this concept of flow for you? As I mentioned, I'm not advocating you go surfing if that doesn't feel right for you. And obviously, at the moment, there are kind of limits on what we can do. But again, I want to stress the point. There were times I needed to rest, plain and simple, because that's what my body needed because I was depleted. However, there were times that I needed to get out of the fear that I was constantly generating. I needed to get out of my head and have a break from the internal noise that I was creating. And learning to do so brought those benefits that I've mentioned earlier. So my question to you is, how could you do that in a way that feels reasonable? Now, I'm going to be talking more about some of these concepts in a free training that I'm going to be starting next week. So do join my Facebook group if you'd like to find out more about that, and look out for the link. So if you've got any questions, any comments, do post them in the chat. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Wishing you great health. Bye for now.